May 12, 1943, 13:47 hours. North Atlantic 47-23 N, 19-41 W. Captain Heinrich Vogel stood in the conning tower of U-537, scanning the horizon through salt-crusted binoculars. Around him, 7 other U-boats ran on the surface in broad daylight, a formation that violated every principle of submarine warfare learned over 4 years of brutal Atlantic combat. Within 15 minutes, all 8 boats would be gone, not to destroyers or corvettes, but to aircraft that should not have been able to reach this far into the Atlantic at all. The Americans called them Liberators, and on that spring afternoon, they would live up to their name in the most devastating 15 minutes of anti-submarine warfare the Kriegsmarine had ever experienced. The catastrophe that unfolded in the mid-Atlantic on May 12, 1943 began 6 weeks earlier in the concrete bunkers of Lorient, France. Gross Admiral Karl Dönitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Kriegsmarine, had summoned his senior U-boat commanders for an emergency conference. The topic: Allied air power was strangling the Wolfpack tactics that had nearly won the Battle of the Atlantic. Captain Heinrich Vogel, commanding the 9th U-boat flotilla, presented a radical proposal documented in Kriegsmarine operational records. His analysis of Allied patrol patterns revealed a gap, a zone between 600 and 800 nautical miles from Newfoundland, where air coverage should be impossible. The consolidated B-24 Liberator had a documented range of about 2,100 miles, but combat operations with full bomb load and patrol time reduced its effective radius to approximately 600 miles from coastal bases. Vogel's plan was mathematically precise. By forming a surface convoy of 8 U-boats in the mid-Atlantic gap, they could achieve sustained speeds of 17 knots, triple their submerged speed of 5 to 6 knots. The formation would cross the Atlantic in 5 days rather than the 15 required for individual submerged transit. The operational math appeared flawless. The gap zone measured roughly 400 nautical miles wide, and Allied patrol aircraft would need about 8 hours of flight time just to reach its edge, leaving minimal loiter time for patrol operations. The U-boat command approved Operation Sea Devil on April 3, 1943. 8 Type 9 U-boats were selected for their extended range capabilities. According to Kriegsmarine records, these boats displaced about 1,120 tons surfaced, carried 22 torpedoes, and mounted 37mm and 20mm anti-aircraft guns. The boats selected were U-537, U-541, U-543, U-546, U-548, U-5 U-5 and U-564. The intelligence failure would prove absolute. What German naval intelligence did not and could not know was that British scientists at the Telecommunications Research Establishment had solved the Liberator's range problem. Technical modifications recorded in RAF Coastal Command logs showed how removing armor plating, installing auxiliary fuel tanks in the bomb bay, and optimizing cruise altitude extended the B-24's operational radius to about 850 nautical miles. The Americans had been operating these very long-range Liberators from Newfoundland since March 1943, closing the mid-Atlantic gap on which Vogel's calculations depended. Signals intelligence from Bletchley Park had been tracking German preparations for Operation Sea Devil since April 15th. RAF Coastal Command and U.S. Navy Anti-Submarine Command knew the U-boats were coming. On May 11, 1943, at 2200 hours, the 8 U-boats rendezvoused 150 miles southwest of Iceland. Vogel's operational order, recovered from wreckage after the war, specified formation sailing in 2 columns of 4 boats, 500-meter spacing, a zigzag pattern every 20 minutes, and continuous air watch from all vessels. The formation submerged during dawn twilight, surfaced at 800 hours, and began their dash across what they believed was a safe zone. They were already being watched. Lieutenant Commander James Harrington of the U.S. Navy's VP-84 Squadron had been airborne from Argentia, Newfoundland since 0530 on May 12, 1943. His B-24 Liberator, nicknamed Atlantic Reaper, carried modifications that represented the cutting edge of anti-submarine warfare technology. The aircraft's normal crew of 10 had been reduced to 8 to save weight. Every available space held fuel tanks. The standard bomb load had been replaced with 8 depth charges and 8 500 lb general-purpose bombs fitted with hydrostatic fuses. The Liberator's ASV Mark III radar, operating on a 10-centimeter wavelength, could detect surfaced submarines at ranges up to 120 miles in optimal conditions. That equipment, developed by British scientists and manufactured in America, had been operational for only 6 weeks. German naval intelligence had no knowledge of its existence. The U-boats running on the surface below had no idea they were radiating a radar signature as clear as a lighthouse beam. At 13:32 hours, radar operator Petty Officer 2nd Class Robert Kellerman detected multiple contacts bearing 047 degree, range 18 miles. The radar return showed 8 distinct targets in formation. Harrington's after-action report, preserved in National Archives records, describes his immediate assessment: 8 surface contacts in military formation, spacing and movement consistent with U-boat Wolfpack tactics. He proceeded to attack altitude. The tactical situation favored the attackers completely. The Liberator approached from the southeast with the sun behind it, making visual detection difficult. The U-boats focused on watching the northern and western horizons where they expected threats to originate, maintained their eastward course at 17 knots. The formation's anti-aircraft capability, while theoretically formidable with many gun barrels across 8 boats, depended on early warning to man battle stations. Harrington descended to 200 feet, approaching at 210 knots. His co-pilot, Lieutenant, junior grade Thomas Brennan, armed all 16 weapons. The bombardier, Ensign David Walsh, crouched in the nose position with the Norden bomb sight aligned. The nose gunner manned twin 50 caliber machine guns. The tactical plan was brutal in its simplicity. A straight strafing run down the length of the formation, releasing weapons sequentially at 3-second intervals. At 13:45 hours, lookouts on U-552. The rear boat in the western column spotted the Liberator. Captain Lieutenant Klaus Förster, commanding U-552, transmitted the warning: aircraft bearing 135 degree, altitude low, closing fast. The radio message intercepted by Allied listening stations would be U-552's last transmission. 7 U-boat commanders simultaneously recognized their nightmare scenario, caught on the surface by a 4-engine bomber with nowhere to run. Emergency dive procedures required 30 to 35 seconds from alarm to submergence. The Liberator was 40 seconds away. Anti-aircraft crews scrambled to their weapons, but coordination was impossible. Each U-boat captain faced an immediate decision: dive and become a stationary target, or remain surfaced and fight with hastily manned guns. Vogel, in U-537 at the formation's head, made the decision that sealed their fate. He ordered all boats to remain surfaced and engage. It was the last order he would ever give. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At 13:47:12, the Liberator's nose guns opened fire at 800 yards. Tracer rounds, 1 in every 5 bullets phosphorus-tipped for visibility, streaked toward the lead U-boat in brilliant lines that seemed almost leisurely in their flight. The 50 caliber rounds, each weighing over 1.7 ounces and traveling at about 2,900 feet per second, reached U-537's conning tower in 1.2 seconds. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Captain Heinrich Vogel, still standing in the conning tower with binoculars raised, was struck by 3 rounds simultaneously. The armor-piercing incendiary bullets tore through the thin steel plating of the conning tower as if it were paper. 4 other crew members on the bridge died in the first 2 seconds of the attack. The lookout attempting to reach the 37mm gun never made it. His body fell backward into the open hatch, blocking the emergency dive procedure. The Liberator's bombardier released the first depth charge at 13:47:18. The 650 lb Mark 44 depth charge, set for shallow detonation at 25 ft, fell away from the bomb bay and struck the water 40 ft ahead of U-537's bow. The hydrostatic fuse, triggered precisely at 25 ft, 300 pounds of Torpex explosive, 50% more powerful than TNT, detonated in a massive underwater blast that created a pressure wave traveling at 5,000 ft per second through the incompressible medium of seawater. U-537's bow lifted completely out of the water from the force of the detonation. The pressure hull, designed to withstand gradual compression at depth, could not survive the instantaneous shock. Rivets sheared along the forward compartment seams, and seawater flooded the torpedo room at tremendous pressure. The boat's forward momentum drove the damaged bow downward. Within 8 seconds of the depth charge detonation, U-537's bow pointed at a 45-degree angle toward the ocean floor, 2,400 ft below. The Liberator continued its strafing run at 200 ft altitude and 210 knots. 3 seconds after the first depth charge release, the second weapon fell toward U-541. Captain Lieutenant Werner Hartmann had managed to get his boat into a crash dive. The conning tower hatch was sealed and the diving planes set to maximum down angle. The boat had achieved approximately 15 ft of depth when the depth charge exploded 30 ft from the stern. The explosion occurred at the worst possible moment in the dive sequence. The stern remained near the surface while the bow had descended to 25 ft, presenting maximum surface area to the pressure wave. The blast crushed the after torpedo room and ruptured fuel tanks. Diesel mixing with seawater created a massive slick on the surface. The submarine's stern rose at an impossible angle, almost vertical, as flooding in forward compartments dragged the bow downward. 47 men died in the lightless interior as their boat became their tomb. U-543, commanded by Oberleutnant Hans-Jürgen Ofer, attempted to fight back. The 37mm gun crew reached their weapon and opened fire. The anti-aircraft gun, capable of firing 80 rounds per minute, sent shells toward the Liberator in desperation. 3 rounds struck the bomber's port wing, punching holes through aluminum skin but missing critical systems. The return fire from the Liberator's waist guns killed 4 of the 5-man gun crew instantly. The third depth charge fell at 1347-24 and detonated directly beneath U-543's pressure hull, the submarine's most vulnerable point. The explosion lifted the entire 1,120-ton boat clear of the water. Crew members below decks were thrown against bulkheads with bone-crushing force. The pressure hull cracked along its length with a sound like a cannon shot. U-543 broke in half. Both sections sank in less than 20 seconds, taking all 52 crew members down with air still in their lungs and terror in their hearts. 12 seconds had elapsed since the attack began. 5 U-boats remained, and the Liberator still carried 13 weapons. The tactical timeline reconstructed from Liberator crew debriefings and recovered German log fragments reveals the mechanical precision of the destruction. At 13:47:30, 18 seconds into the attack, U-546 attempted what would prove to be the formation's only successful emergency dive. Captain Lieutenant Powell. Dietrich had recognized the hopelessness of surface combat the instant U-537's conning tower exploded under machine gun fire. His crew executed the crash dive procedure flawlessly. The conning tower hatch slammed shut, vents opened, main ballast tanks flooded, and the bow planes angled to maximum down deflection. The submarine achieved 30 ft of depth when the fourth depth charge detonated 50 ft from the hull. At that depth, the pressure hull could withstand the shockwave. The boat shuddered violently. Light bulbs shattered throughout the interior, and crewmen were thrown against equipment. But the hull held. Dietrich ordered the boat to 200 ft and emergency speed. U-546 escaped, damaged but operational. Of the 8 U-boats in Operation Sea Devil, it would be the only survivor. 48 men owed their lives to Dietrich's instant decision to dive rather than fight. But survival meant leaving 7 sister boats to their fate, a choice that would haunt every survivor for the rest of their lives. The Liberator's bomb run continued with devastating efficiency. U-548, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Friedrich Elrich, caught fire after the 5th depth charge detonation ruptured diesel fuel lines at 13:47:36. Burning fuel spread across the water faster than men could swim. 23 crew members abandoned ship. 18 died in the flames. 5 survivors pulled from the water 3 hours later by a Canadian corvette bore burn injuries so severe that 2 died during evacuation to Newfoundland, U-552. The boat whose lookouts had first spotted the Liberator faced the 6th weapon at 13:47:42. Captain Lieutenant Klaus Förster had kept his boat on the surface, attempting to bring multiple anti-aircraft weapons to bear. The 20mm guns rattled out hundreds of rounds, and the 37mm fired methodically, but not a single round struck the Liberator in a vital area. The return fire from the bomber's multiple gun positions killed or wounded every man on deck. The depth charge that destroyed U-552 exploded directly beneath the control room. The blast ruptured the pressure hull in multiple locations simultaneously. The submarine sank bow first at an angle approaching 60 degrees. Seawater flooded through the damaged hull at such pressure that men in forward compartments were crushed against bulkheads. The entire boat disappeared beneath the surface in 14 seconds. No survivors. At 13:47:48, 36 seconds into the attack, U-558 took the 7th depth charge. Captain Lieutenant Lawrence Gunther had attempted a surface run to escape the attack zone, pushing the diesel engines to emergency power, 18 knots, in a desperate sprint. The depth charge fell short of the submarine but detonated shallow. The pressure wave struck the stern at an oblique angle, jamming the rudder hard to starboard and destroying the port propeller shaft. U-558 began a death spiral, turning in tight circles at high speed with no ability to steer or dive. The crew abandoned the stern compartments as water flooded through the damaged shaft seal. Recognizing his boat was doomed, the commanding officer ordered abandon ship. 36 men jumped into the Atlantic. The submarine continued its circular course for another 2 minutes before flooding pulled it under. 29 of the 36 survivors were later recovered by Allied ships. The remaining 7 died from hypothermia in 40 fjord underwater before rescue arrived. 1 minute had elapsed since the Liberator opened fire. 7 U-boats were destroyed or crippled. 1 remained, U-564, commanded by Oberleutnant Zur Z. Reinhard Suren, the formation's youngest commander at 26. He had 9 weapons remaining to face and perhaps 20 seconds to live. Suren had one advantage his 7 sister boats had not possessed: time to observe and learn. 60 seconds of watching U-boats die had taught him that staying on the surface meant certain death, but diving made a submarine a stationary target for the Liberator's remaining weapons. He chose a third option that regulations did not permit and doctrine did not anticipate. He would fight and dive simultaneously. At 13:47:54, as the Liberator completed its run past the burning hulk of U-558, Suren gave a series of orders later preserved in testimony from the boat's survivors. All hands to diving stations, prepare to crash dive. Flak crews remain at stations and fire until water reaches the guns. Engine room maintain full power until I order dive. It was tactically insane, and it was U-564's only chance. The 37mm and 20mm gun crews opened fire as the Liberator banked for its second attack run. The anti-aircraft fire, more accurate now that gunners had observed the aircraft's attack profile, stitched holes across the Liberator's fuselage. One 37mm shell struck the starboard waist gun position, killing Seaman First Class Daniel O'Connor instantly and wounding the port waist gunner. Another round penetrated the radio compartment, destroying communications equipment but miraculously missing the radio operator. Lieutenant Commander Harrington felt the aircraft shudder under the impacts. His after-action report, typed on blood-spotted paper, described the moment clinically. Aircraft sustained multiple hits from target anti-aircraft fire. Crew casualties reported. Decision made to press attack despite damage. Target presented threat to Allied shipping if allowed to escape. The Liberator lined up for its second run at 13:48:10, approaching from a different angle, lower at 150 ft and faster. U-564's anti-aircraft crews tracked the aircraft with increasing desperation. Suren, watching from the bridge, waited until the Liberator was at 600 YD before giving the order. Emergency dive. All guns cease fire and clear the deck. The gun crews abandoned their weapons and dove for the conning tower hatch. Suren was the last man on the bridge. He slammed the hatch shut as water already flowed across the forward deck. U-564 began its dive at 13:48:18. The Liberator was 400 YD away and closing at 220 knots. The release point for the 8th depth charge would be in approximately 6 seconds. The Liberator crew faced an unexpected tactical problem. U-564 was diving, but not in a standard emergency dive profile. The submarine maintained forward momentum, creating a moving target below the surface. The bombardier, Ensign Walsh, had to calculate not where the U-boat was, but where it would be when the depth charge reached detonation depth. He had perhaps 3 seconds to solve a 3-dimensional trigonometry problem. While wounded men screamed in the aircraft behind him, Walsh released at 13:48:22. The depth charge fell free, tumbling through 150 ft of air before striking the ocean surface directly above U-558's stern. The submarine had reached 40 ft of depth. The hydrostatic fuse was set for 25 ft. The weapon descended past the pressure hull without detonating, exploding at 25 ft depth but 80 feet behind the submarine's stern. The pressure wave, attenuated by distance and the water itself, cracked deck plating and blew out internal light bulbs, but did not rupture the pressure hull. U-564 descended to 250 ft, leveled off and continued eastward at slow speed. Serene, standing in the control room with blood running from a cut on his forehead, knew he had just experienced the luckiest moment of his life. Above, the Liberators circled the wreckage field, searching for the submarine that had escaped. 8 depth charges remained, but U-564 had disappeared into the Atlantic depths, and the Liberator's fuel gauges showed time to return to base. At 13:48:45, the attack ended. Elapsed time, 1 minute 33 seconds. 7 U-boats destroyed. Survivors in the water, 68. Kriegsmarine losses, 382 men dead or missing. The Liberator Atlantic Reaper turned northwest at 13:49, climbing to 1,000 FT for the 8-hour flight back to Argentia. Lieutenant Commander Harrington's fuel gauges showed 900 gallons remaining, enough for the return flight.